Give me 1 second. Cool. Okay, so it's loading up. When you go to the... Try to just kill the server and bring it back up. So if you go back to your ID, then Control C, and then just press stop there. And go back.
It's the same one, right?
I think 472, it might be the same one, yeah. It could be a different IP address though. You just need to copy it.
Okay, I think I might have it wrong.
That's right.
Controls.
Command C.
Command C.
That's okay. Click on details. Click on visit this and save site. Okay, there you go.
Should we have already done these labs, the last two?
No, not the CSS ones. No, you're fine. I mean, you can just to get ahead, but there's no.
This hurricane supposed to touch this area?
What's that?
I said this hurricane. I said, when is it supposed to touch this area?
That's a good question. I don't.
I think it's, they keep pushing it back.
Yeah.
But I think it's like Friday, Saturday.
And it shouldn't be that bad by the time it gets up here, but. So we're gonna start class anyway today. Filling out a survey. You should have received a link, I think. Check your email. It's just like a course evaluation thing. See how things are going so far.
It's in our actual email or our like inbox?
It's in your actual email, I think. It's probably this email. You see it or?
Did you just send it?
I didn't send it. Oh, I'm sorry. They're going to send it tomorrow. I guess we're going to do it on Monday. Okay, that's fine. Yeah. We'll give people a couple more minutes to show up, but while we're waiting, is there any leftover questions from the labs that you're working on last couple of days? Everybody's making through them.
Did we talk about all of the different CSS selectors?
No, so that's today actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did that lab and I was like, I don't remember this. I
Yeah.
remember there being this many about like the relationships and the different.
Yeah, we just talked about classes, IDs, and elements as selectors. There's a whole bunch of them that we'll go over shortly. Yep.
Do I have time to run to the kitchen?
Yeah, go for it.
Jenna is here inside.
Yeah, that's all on the way.
Yeah, let's see.
Do we have that?
No, this is like the teacher instructor. It's basically the same stuff that's in the README though. It's not really.
Are you teaching the other class that's about to start too?
No. Is there another one that's about to start like during our class?
No, I think it'll be Tuesday, Thursday.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that's what happened last time. There was the same class, but at a different time. Oh, that's too much.
What skills do you need to do WordPress?
So you don't technically need any real development skills to do WordPress.
Mm-hmm.
You can, you can go to WordPress.org and you can set up a domain there by clicking through some things and naming your domain, and then what happens with a WordPress site is it's a bunch of configurable things. So you have a side menu that opens up and you can change out the content and type some things and move things into position.
Like Wix.
It's like Wix. It's not as good as Wix from that perspective. Where WordPress becomes powerful is that in addition to allowing people to just like click on things, you can write a lot of custom code that you can put into a WordPress site.
Okay.
And so they're more consistent with like Drupal Drupal, WordPress, or some other big ones that I'm forgetting right now. But that's how they work, is essentially most of the time, there's like three users essentially. There's your end user who's looking at the website that just sees the website as the website. There's the administrative users, who are people who are changing out the content, but they don't necessarily have development skills. They're just clicking on buttons and changing things. And then you have WordPress developers who are actually writing modules so that the administrator can click on buttons to do things so that the end user sees it. Yeah. Now Wix, I mean, at this point, it seems silly to me. I'm not a WordPress developer. I've only done a little bit of development in WordPress. It seems silly to me that you would create a WordPress site, because to me, you either create a Wix site because you're trying to create something that's customer facing, it's for your business, or you go and develop something that's very custom, that is more about business process, or something that a basic website wouldn't normally do. Something that has real functionality. So for example, like our website we built from scratch because it's about creating messaging experiences and sending out customized communications and things that like you wouldn't see at like an Amazon.com website or a business website, which is more what Wix is made for. But the skills you would need to do WordPress development is understanding the WordPress framework and how to create those plugins, those modules you can put in there, and then PHP is the technology that's behind WordPress, and Drupal actually.
And that's PHP is a backend.
PHP is a backend, yeah. Yeah, so these are all the selectors that we're going to go over today.
So, for React, if you are comfortable with, do people just get comfortable with JavaScript and then figure React out? Like, is it? I was looking at a job description and they were like, "Don't worry if you've never used React. Some of our developers hadn't, but it's fine."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "But is it fine?"
No. So what they mean is, what they're saying in that job post is, if you are a developer, which means you've done this professionally for a little while, and you've written things in Angular or in Vue or in jQuery even, or you've just built complex JavaScript programs, then if you haven't written anything in React before, it's no big deal. You'll figure it out. What they don't mean is like you can skip. So yeah, they don't mean you can skip JavaScript and come here. What they're saying is you've probably done something similar before, and if you're a good developer, what you learn is framework to framework doesn't matter. You can switch between the frameworks. You can switch between the languages. It's all coding. It's all conditionals. It's all if else and for loops. That's it. That's everything. It's just it's just yes, no, and loop. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, we're glad you're back. But React is a different framework than others. There are a lot of nuances to it. It has a very specific way of doing things. It takes a little bit to get up and running, but yeah, I mean, I just started writing React for the first time like a week ago. Got a few things done. I mean, it's not that hard to transition, but it's a framework. It's its own beast. You should know JavaScript before you do React. All right. Well, Charles just went to the kitchen, so I'll wait for him.
He did, and then I saw Josh as well.
Okay. Yep. So let him come back.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I tried to go back to my Slack channel. The only thing I see is from the level you heard.
Is the only thing you see is what?
In the Slack channel is the last message from Chicago.
Yeah, that's
It's killing me because then I can't go back and.
So what I tried to do, a couple things. One is we're going to try and put all of our actual code on the GitLab. Things that are important, I pin to the channel.
Okay.
So if you go into the channel and you click on this pin up here, you'll see I've pinned a couple of things in there. And then you can click on that and go to them. One of the things that I pinned there is, so I'm recording all these classes. They're live streaming actually to YouTube, but they record and stay there. So if you want to review the class, you can click on this link and it'll take you there and you can see all the classes that we've done so far.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the classes we've done?
Yep. Yeah, I wasn't very good about doing this last time, so none of those are up there, but all of our classes are up there.
And this is in Slack. I mean, the link is in Slack.
Yeah, the link's in Slack. It's in the, so if you click on pin, so click on the channel and then on the pin thing up here,
Okay.
and then over here you see two pinned items. One of them is the YouTube channel. Yeah, the reason why you don't see all of the messages is because they just, when you don't pay, you only get 10,000 messages, and in Learn Co, right, those get used up incredibly quickly because all the students are on there.
It's the only failure, I'm kidding.
Scroll up in the
What's it?
in the black, in this guy, in the terminal. There you go. So it says it expects
What's up?
the div selector to have background white, but it doesn't. So it wants background white, not background color white.
Alright.
It's just background. Yeah, I think that's all it's.
Did you say no straight?
I'm sorry. I said Birk, you like. But it just felt real segregated.
Alright guys, so we're going to start again working on our Git skills a little bit. So go ahead and open up your terminal. We need to cd back into our learning-git2 directory. For most of you, that should be at cd tilde, which is your home directory. So it's in your Finder. It's the thing that has a home next to it. But tilde is a shortcut for that. So tilde slash code slash learning dash get to, and you can press enter. Mine's actually in a slightly different location, but and then when you get there, type pwd. You should see something that looks like this. So slash users slash your home directory slash code in your case slash learning dash get to. And then when you're there, if you type get status, you may be on your branch. If you are on your branch, then we need to go through the process of adding, committing, and pushing our code before we check out master. So, where are people? Is everybody on a branch? Are you on your?
I'm on Charles-I.
Yeah, so you're on your branch. Shikari, you're on your branch.
CD today.
CD space. So you have to. There's no space between the tilde and the slash. So if you press off.
Here, you want that?
So you know. Yeah.
So mine is just on shadow, so
Oh.
You do.
Okay.
And then, yeah, it takes a look at English to the cursor. That's it. Press it. Yeah, I think you're there. PWD.
What is
Print working directory. So it shows you where you are. So you're in slash users slash your home directory slash code slash learning. So here we go. So we can get status. Okay. So it seems like everybody's in their branch. If we can go through the commands again, how do we commit and push our code?
First, add.
Yep. Get add.
Hyphen A.
Yeah. Let's just change the get add dot because I think the capital A is.
I don't know. Maybe already brain.
It's okay. It still works. If you know how to do it that way, no problem. But let's switch it to get at dot just because it's a little bit more straightforward. We won't mess it up verbally. Okay. So get space add space dot, and then what do we need to do to actually create the version?
Get commit M. Well, hyphen M.
Yep.
And then a message.
Yep. And then to push our code, what do we need to do?
get push
Yep.
origin branch or master.
Yep. Git push origin branch name. Okay. So can everybody do that? And then how do we check the status? Yeah. Just the same. Maybe feel good.
It gets that.
Yeah, that's good. And when you do that, you should see that you're still on branch, whatever your branch name is, and just say your branch is up to date with, and then your branch name, which is remote. Nothing to commit working tree clones. We want everybody to get into that state. No? You got it? Everybody there? Okay. Your words are all green because you set your preferences to the, I think it's the Pro terminal. So if you, I don't actually use terminal, so let's see. If you go to terminal and then preferences, over here you're going to see several options. Yours is probably homebrew, maybe? You want to select Pro and then click on the default button. It's down there. And then if you close your terminal and reopen it, it's going to bring so you need a CD into code. CD tilde. No, yeah, so and that's fine if you want to do that. But so you're in tilde already, which is why that says tilde right there. Okay. So you need to go into code. Yep. Code. Tab. Well, now you're in code. So you see there it says you're in code now. Yeah. So now you need to CD into learning dash. There you go. All right. So now it says learning dash. Yep. So then git status. Yep, PWD will tell you where you are. You can do PWD at any point. You can do LS at any point. Those two things help you to understand where you are in your directory structure. What does LS do?
It lists the contents of the directory you're in.
It lists the contents of the directory you're in, and what does PWD do?
To different directory.
Print working directory. It tells you the path to where you are currently.
Okay.
You want to do that again?
Yeah.
Okay. So LS lists the contents of the directory that you're in currently. So it'll list the files and folders that you're in. So LS lists, I mean, it's almost all the way there. Lists.
Are we putting that in to the chart?
No, I'm just definitionally. You should like have this somewhere. You can always look it up. It's all over the internet. But PWD is print working directory. It tells you the path to the directory that you're currently in.
Okay, so I just opened a new window. So to navigate to my folder.
Yeah, so you can start with saying essentially where am I. So if you do PWD,
Yeah, and I'm in this one.
so you're in the home directory. So then so that's LS. So it tells you, and then you want to CD into code. Yep.
Code.
See, because the code's right there. So you want to.
I can do.
You can
CD
keep going.
code.
So you can do slash, and then you can, because there's only one directory in there, you can just tab and it'll finish. Oh no, you have two things. So if you type the letter L and then tab, it auto completes, because the only thing inside of the code directory that starts with L is learning-git 2. So,
Okay.
and now you're where you're supposed to be. So if you type git status, yep.
Okay.
All right. So is everybody in the state where it says git branch and you're on branch and then your branch name and then nothing to commit, working tree clean? Very good. Okay. So next step is we are going to do git checkout master. In my case, I'm already on master. You can type git status. It should say you're on branch master. Your branch is up to date with origin master. Nothing to commit. Working tree clean.
So I'm on branch quiche.
Okay. So if you do git check, do git status first.
Right.
And what is that?
So when I do get status,
Okay.
it tells me that I have
So,
to merge.
yes.
Probably from last, top of the last.
Yep.
I can do get abort. So for the merge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's git merge dash dash.
Oh, I have to type the dash.
And then you have to put merge before the dash. Yeah, there's space. Yeah. Okay, git status. Okay, cool. So then git checkout master. And that's all good. Just do git status just to make sure. Okay. So now we want to pull any changes that have been made to master since the last time. I made one that's kind of cool that won't affect you guys all that much, but it'll be useful. So we want to pull down any changes that have been made to master. So how do we do that? Yeah, git pull origin master. And because we should be on a clean master and all we're doing is fast forwarding, it's called master, to be up to date with the newest code, you shouldn't have any problems if you run git status. So if you run git status, it should just say, yep. Alright, so if you run git status again, it should be back to this state. It should say on branch master, your branch is up to date with origin master. Nothing to commit, your working tree is clean. Okay. So now what we're going to do is check out a branch so that we can do our JavaScript exercise of the day. So we check out a branch, a new branch member with git checkout -b, and then we started with our name, and then a branch name. So we're going to talk about functions today. So we're going to do get checkout-b sam-functions. Okay. Before we get into functions, I do want to talk a little bit about, I want to do a little review from last time. So what is a variable? JavaScript. Why do we have them? What are they useful for?
It's a, I would say it's kind of like it's an identifier.
It's an identifier. What do we use? What do we use it for? There's a couple keywords I repeated a bunch of times last time. You don't have to use them, but
you can store and update a value.
You can store and update the value. That's a good way of putting it. Yep. Variables are a thing that will store data for you and that you can update potentially with new data. Why do we use variables? Remember back to a couple of the examples that we used last time? I know, it's been days. All right. So if I say x equals 1, right, and then I say y equals x plus 5, what is y? 6.
So anytime that you see x within the code, it will apply that value.
That's right. So you can substitute any appearance of a variable for the value that it's been set to. Okay, so we're setting x to 1, and then anywhere we see x, we can replace it with 1. Okay, does that make sense?
Quick question. Sorry.
Yep.
Is there a way to undo a branch? I misspelled function. Sorry.
So you can just do another get checkout -b space and then spell it correctly if you want to, or it doesn't really matter all that much.
Yep.
But I get OCD. It's a valuable trait as a programmer. So. Okay, so this is the numeric substitution. Another type of substitution that we talked about was with strings. Does anybody remember what a string is?
So,
Is that for text?
It's for text, yeah. So variables, right, are words, they're characters, they're letters. So we need a way of distinguishing things that we want to mark as text when we're setting them into a variable. So I could say something like name equals John, right? What's the problem with the way that I've done this? There are spaces. Spaces, actually, we'll go into this a little bit more later, but white space doesn't matter in any of the languages that we're going to use. You can have as many spaces as you want. There are some times when you need to have a space, but most of the time they don't matter. But I could have 50 spaces there, I could have 50 spaces here, it doesn't matter. I could have 0 spaces here, I could have 0 spaces here, it doesn't matter. But, so what's the problem with what I'm doing?
It needs quotations.
It needs quotations because otherwise, what it's going to interpret this as is you're trying to set name equal to a variable named John. So what this is doing is if I had a variable called John and I set it equal to Tim just to confuse everyone, what is name at this point?
John with the value is Tim?
Yeah, so name is Tim, really. You can even just skip John, it doesn't matter. It's just transference, right? So, right, do you guys see that? So I set John equal to Tim to confuse everyone, and then I'm setting name equal to John. So name, because it's equal to John, and we can replace John in any case with whatever it's been set to. We can replace John with Tim, and so name is Tim.
So variables with words need quotation marks.
So variables, if you want to set a variable equal to a word, you need to put quotation marks, and those are called strings. Okay. I got that? All right. And then the other thing that we talked about last time was a debugging tool called console.log. Does anybody remember what that does?
it just prints.
It just prints into your browser. So if I go to my index.html, how do I see it?
Go to developer tools.
Yep, go to developer tools. So the easiest way to get there is to right click on the page and then click inspect. Once you do that, you should have a console. It's either here or you can click on your tab up here. And we can see right now I'm console logging hello. And so we see hello. We'll go through a quick second example with the variables here. So if you go ahead and open up your index.js, and remember the reason why this is all happening is because in our index.html we have a script tag that is sourcing the index.js. But we can write whatever JavaScript we want inside of our index.js. Right now it just says console.log hello, but let's try one of our examples here. So let's say name equals Tim, and then we're going to say pseudonym. So we'll just say pseudo equals name, and then we're going to say another variable equals pseudo, and then we're going to console log out another variable. And so when I reload the page, what are we going to see? Tim, right? Because again, we're going to say, okay, look, another variable we're setting equal to pseudo. Let me look up in my code. Pseudo is being set to name. Okay, let me look further up in my code. Name is being set to Tim. So if I come down this other way, I can say, okay, Tim is name, so I can replace any instances of name with Tim. So this becomes Tim, and I can pseudo then is Tim, and I can replace any instances of pseudo with Tim. So that becomes Tim, and another variable is Tim, and so that's what we're going to see.
As displays in the browser, I might copy and pull back into place it in Chrome.
To display it in the browser, the easiest way is to open up your Finder window,
Oh, yeah.
and then go double click on it.
Gotcha.
I must have left. Yeah. That's the problem right there. Single or double, it doesn't matter. Nope. So there we go. Tip. Cool.
So, yep. And then, yeah. So you have hello still.
So if you make the changes to your code that are made, yeah. Yeah, it is important that you save the file. That'll get you all the time. You think that it's going to make a change and you haven't saved it yet.
So I think it's just a spelling difference. Yeah. So it's just that. Yeah.
No, not an issue.
Let's if you go back to your yeah, so you double click on the index.js, which is just going to show the contents of the JavaScript file. We need to click on index.html, where we've included the JavaScript file in the script, which tells the browser interpret this as code, not
Gotcha.
That's the
first class.
Yeah, so
It's outside, or is that my imagination?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
so if you go back to your Finder, yeah, so that's where it's happening. But if you go back to here, just double click on that.
Do y'all see Tim in another variable?
Okay, now if you expect.
Can you see Tim or another variable?
Yeah.
What are you getting?
I'm getting another variable.
I'm getting so most likely that's because another variable is in quotes. It is. This is the point of the exercise.
Okay.
So if you put it in quotes, it will literally put
Okay.
whatever's inside of the quotes. If you don't put it in quotes, it interprets it as the variable and it goes up the chain.
Okay, so I know what's in quotes.
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
All right. That's good, I guess. Okay, so now we're going to talk about functions. Functions are a little bit different from variables, and in many ways they're actually very similar. In that you could write a function that all it does is return a value, and in that case it is very similar to a variable. Functions become useful though because they allow us to be able to group code together, code that
logically goes together into one place. And they use what are called parameters, which are essentially variables that can be reset and overloaded and reused over and over again. We're going to start with the simplest case, and we might talk briefly about the more complicated parameter case. Okay, so let's start with the simple case. We're going to create a function, and we're going to use a very similar example so you can see. So the function is going to be called name, and we are going to return Tim. Now a function has to be called at some point, so very similar to the variable. Like you have to call a function for it to actually execute. So as it is right now, Tim will never show up anywhere. And even if I put a console.log inside of this function, we'll never see this logged. The reason is that I have not ever called name. Okay, so I'll show you the example. Stay with me for just a second. We all agree, no console.log there. Okay.
Yeah.
If I call the function, just say I put name with open and close parentheses somewhere, now we will see I am in name. The number of times that you call the function, you can call it over and over again, which is what makes functions particularly useful. Get it all of those times. Okay. So we can call the function over and over again, and we can get the value to come back out. Okay. So we write the function. It's a way of grouping logical code together. The code inside of function, so in between these two square curly brackets, does not execute, the browser doesn't actually touch them until you call the function. Okay? So it doesn't actually, the computer never actually goes inside of these curly braces until you call the function after it's been created.
They print Tim as well, or just I am in name?
It doesn't print Tim. So the way that we would print Tim is we would have to console log the result of name, which is going to be Tim. So now, see that? No? Yeah, okay.
But we could console log Tim within the function.
You could console log Tim inside of the function. You could actually, so this is called a void function, where you're not returning anything as a value. You can just console log Tim if you want to. And then it happens every time that we call the function. Okay?
So why is it
Because now we're not returning anything anymore. So this last one where we console log out the result, there is no result. It's undefined because we didn't return anything. Cool?
Yep.
All right. So let's take a slightly more advanced case just so that we can see why functions become valuable. So functions can take parameters, which are things that are variables inside of the function, but they can be defined when you're calling the function. So, for example, I might have a function called name, and it's going to take two parameters. It's going to take first name and last name. And what I'm going to return is first name plus, and then a space for a string, last name. Okay, semicolon. I'm going to forget semicolons all over the place. JavaScript is pretty good about not yelling at you when you don't put your semicolons, so long as you're putting new executables on new lines, which we'll do all the time. In the code framework that I use, we just don't use semicolons, so I'll forget all the time. But.
What did you say you put the quotes for?
Okay, so this is what's called string concatenation. So what we were doing is saying I want to write first name, and then I want to concatenate, which is to say I want to add to that a space, which is this string right here, and then I want to add to that last name. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So now, when we call the function, what's going to happen when I call the function?
When it want the parameters.
It'll want the parameters, yeah, so we'll probably get yelled at. So how would, does anybody know how we would put the parameters in here?
Separated by commas.
Separated by commas. So exactly the same way that they are up here, but we're gonna actually put in quotes, John, comma, Miller. So when I go back to my code now, when I refresh the browser, what are we going to see in the console? Just to go.
John space Miller.
Will we?
Oh, yes.
Wait, what? Try.
I was gonna say you have to call it, but it's called.
It's called, yep. It is called, but we're still not going to see John space Miller in the console yet. What are we missing? How have we been displaying things in the console previously? Console.log, and I don't have one of those, right? So if I refresh the page, we don't see anything. But if I console.log, then we see John Miller. Okay. So what's nice about functions, the reason why these things matter, is that then I can do Sam Birk Joey Paps, right? And I can just change it, but I still get the same functionality. It always turns the first name and last name into a string that concatenates them. Does everybody get that? Ish. It's okay. That's why we're starting on this so early. I mean, the class, like the way the Flatiron has it set up, we wouldn't actually get to this for another 3 weeks, actually. So I'm trying to introduce it early so that we can reiterate and keep doing this in practice early.
Like, what's a function?
What's a function again? And by the time you start to get it, you're out of here, and it's just not enough time.
Okay, so we were talking about variables.
Yep. Yep.
So a function is a variable?
So functions can act like variables in that you can declare a function. So this function right here, we could do, instead of creating it as a function, we could create a variable called name. So I'm just going to call it name var and set it equal to the returned value. But in this case, we have to declare first name and last name higher up. We have to say first name equals John, last name equals. Okay. In that case, name var is the same as, so name var at this point is the same as name comma John comma Miller. See how that happens? Functions are useful though, because if I want to get this same functionality down here, okay, so if I write this, what is this, 12 lines of code, I get the same thing that I can get with a function in 7.
Okay.
See that?
So they do the same thing.
Yeah, it's just that the function encapsulates the code, so the code is only run when you call it, and you can pass in the variable along with it.
Okay.
So parameters are essentially variables that are used inside of the function.
So in my case, what's more customary, because it seems like I've seen situations where people will name their variables first and then like run function, or kind of call them separately.
Yeah, so
So kind of like you just did in that example.
Yep.
There's 12 lines. I've seen it more like that way than this.
Yeah, so you can, you can use these in a whole bunch of different ways. So there's no reason why we couldn't say first name. Let's even, just to be clear that it doesn't have to be named the same thing. First equals John. Last equals test. And then here we could do first, last. So what's going to happen if I refresh my browser now?
John test.
It's going to say John space test. See why? So again, here's variables. Variables are aliases or places we can substitute. So we can replace anywhere we see first with John. So this is replaced with John. Replace anywhere you see last with test. It's test. So when we get inside of here now, first name has been set to John. Last name has been set to test. And what we're returning is the concatenation of first name and last name with space. Does that make sense? Ish. It does. It takes a little bit to really get this. Okay. All right. So that's functions. We have two more major topics that we're going to try and cover. Each time we'll review a little bit of the JavaScript, and then we will, next time we'll do either conditionals or loops. I haven't decided yet. And then we'll do the other one after that. And then you have all of the tools to program everything in the world. Like literally everything. It may be difficult because there's all kinds of frameworks and packages and all these things that have done things for you, but those are all the pieces to programming in every single language. Cool?
So we're going to do functions again.
We'll do functions again. Yeah, lots of times. Okay. We'll do, yeah, so pretty much every class, as we review these things, we'll do the ones that we've done so far and the new one. So eventually, so after a week from now, when we've covered all 4 of the pieces, we will then review all 4 of the pieces every time. Yep. And hopefully advance topics after that. Okay.
Will we be doing like arrays and stuff?
We will go over arrays and objects. Yep. Yeah, so that may be a 5th thing where we do additional data types. I've kind of been introducing them. So you've already seen 2 data types. So we've seen numbers and we've seen strings. Another data type that's simple before we get into like arrays and objects is a boolean. Does anybody know what a boolean is?
I know for like search engines.
What's that?
I know what like in terms of search engines and stuff like that.
Yeah,
False.
true, false. That's it. It's just yes, no, true, false, 1, 0. They are written in JavaScript quite literally as true and false. They're not strings is the important thing. True and false mean something in JavaScript. Okay. So we'll use those a lot more next time because we'll start talking, if we talk about conditionals next time, we'll use those next time. We can quickly do an object just to make this example of functions a little bit more clear. An object is a way of putting multiple attributes together into one consistent unit. So for a great example of that is a person. So you create a person object. The way you do that is you say person equals and then curly braces, and we'll type first name Sam, last name Smith, age 56. Okay. Baller, false. Okay. So what we can do with this then is let's change our name function so that instead of accepting first name, last name, it just accepts a parameter called person. And what we need to do to access the first name and last name off of an object is do it. It's called dot notation. So if I make these changes, what do you think is going to happen when I refresh the page?
It's going to say Sam Smith.
It's going to say Sam space Smith. So that's what an object is. An object is a way of associating attributes together. This is generally how you'll get data from APIs that use JSON, if you've heard of that. What they'll do is pass you down an array, a bunch of objects. So you'll see, like if you were hitting a person API, you would have an array of objects that look like this, and then you could potentially pass them through your name function to be able to get that name to display to your end user.
You can pretty much pull or utilize any of the attributes any way you want, I guess.
You can use any of the attributes.
You can call all the ages of.
Yeah, so I could do, let's say that we kept going, is age, and what we'll see, person dot age. Okay. Cool. And then you could put, anyway, we'll do that next time. I want to keep going with this because it's so much fun, but we have to talk about CSS, which is also fun. All right, so I'm going to push this. You all should do the same. So if you've made changes, go ahead and git add, git commit, and then git push, origin your branch. And then you should be able to run git status. And again, you should say on branch your named as functions. Nothing to commit, working tree clean. And when you're there, and only when you're there, we can do git checkout master.
Don't have all those changes. Do you still want to push it?
You can. Just for practicing the git skills, you can do it. It just creates another branch on GitLab. It's okay. And then once you're on master, just do git status, we should be good. And then we'll take a 10-minute break before we get into the CSS.
An error reference in person object for the value under age. Do all values in an object need quotations?
No. So because 56 is literally a number, you type numbers without quotation.
Okay. So
Git add,
Yes. So it's a semicolon.
Yeah.
git
There you
push,
go.
origin.
Yeah. But great
Wait,
way,
it's
great
git
job
add.
reading errors.
No, then period. Get add space.
That's an incredibly useful skill.
Yeah.
Like that's how you move forward. Once you understand how that console can help you and debugging can help you, that's when you can start to actually program.
Yeah.
Okay, git,
Commit dash one. And then another branch inside of it.
okay,
Then get status.
okay.
Get checkout master. And then we did get status again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, do you know why it's not auto completing when you start a tag? Like if I start on to a tab, it'll complete to that point, but it won't
If
create
you close it,
Yeah,
does it
it
not?
makes sense.
Okay, so there's a plugin. If you just search in Google for Atom autocomplete
It's like,
HTML.
I'll kind of get it
Found
now.
auto close.
Yep, that's probably it.
Okay.
So scroll down a little bit.
And I looked in here and it looked like I've already got some stuff that sounds like it does that. So autocomplete ASM API,
Oh yeah.
CSS, HTML. It's not disabled.
No, that looks fine. Let's just run it again just to make sure, but then it may just be. So if you go back to your browser, there's scroll down a little bit. This line of code APM install autoclose HTML. I mean, I think you're right, but
And I can just be anywhere when I.
yep.
Just gonna practice.
Yeah, I hope so. Right.
And then you probably need to quit Atom entirely and reopen it. And if that doesn't work, I might recommend that you just uninstall Atom and reinstall. But so it won't work there because yep. There you go.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So
Cool.
I think it's just I don't
Whatever.
know.
That's what you
bugs. Yeah, I don't know.
Sam, what do I have to do to make my letter screen?
You want to do what?
To make it look nice?
Oh, like where my thing is green.
Yeah, some of the words are green.
Okay, so I do special things, which is why. But I'm not sure it will work for yours. Let me see. So there's this thing called the bash profile, which is in your root directory. You probably don't have one currently, but you can put in all kinds of stuff to change your environment around. And the thing that is making mine color like that, I believe, is this piece. So if you
Need that info.
yep. And go into your. So we can try. Atom might do this. So if you type Atom space tilde slash dot bash underscore profile. H. Okay, you do have to be in so you can just paste it right there.
I did that. I installed that when I was trying to set it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. But just save that. And then if you go back to your terminal, you can do one of two things. You can open a new window, so just close this one and open a new one. It's the easiest way to do this.
That's the way it got fair. Oh. It's only Wednesday. I feel like it should be on Friday.
It's pretty nice sunset out here.
So there you go. So now it's got the thing. So if you see space code
Hurricane.
Yeah, I know.
slash L tab.
Pleasure.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
You used to do it. Or you used to do it.
Previously.
Okay, yeah. It's not really bad.
See the white along the rooftop? There's a white railing around the roof. And then I'm making that up. There we go. Just the leftmost white color.
Yes, it is a great
I don't know. What's your one?
Okay, I see it. Just wondering if there's a there's white house. Yeah.
So Sam, within the function, why don't you put quotes around it, true or false?
So true and false again are. So it's the same. It's the same reason why we don't put quotes around numbers.
Okay.
So numbers are special to JavaScript, and so it sees them as numbers, and so you can do things like multiply them together or add them together and get a result. Remember when we did the strings, we can add strings together too, but that's a very different thing, right? So for example, if and we can just play around in the console right now. So if I say 4 plus 5, I get back 9.
Okay.
But if I quote 4 plus quoted 5, I get back 45.
Buy something and they will phrase
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's special to quote or not quote things. It's the same thing with true and false. So true it means this is true, like yes, right? False means this is false. If I quote them, I get back a string of true or a string of false, which is not the same thing. That's like the word false as opposed to this is a true or false statement. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. JavaScript does some weird things too. Like, you could say true, so we're evaluating whether true is equal to true, and that's false. But true is equal to false is true.
So the first one is comparing a string to a special keyword.
Yeah.
Saying it's not true.
Yeah. So the first one is saying a string true is not equal to true true.
Yeah.
Right. And you're supposed to use 3 equal signs in JavaScript, which is I want to check both the type and the value. So I have to make sure that these are both booleans and they are both equal to each other. I want to make sure these are both strings and they're equal to each other. So for example, if I do 4 equals 4, I get true, but they're not. It's not really true. If you do 4 equals, they're not the same.
Mm-hmm.
So you generally want to use 3 equal signs.
So the first one is checking the value.
First one's checking the value.
Type.
Yep.
Second one is checking the value and then checking the type.
Yep. And you don't know how JavaScript is going to deal with the value versus type thing, which is what we saw with the true equals true example up here.
Yeah.
So true equals true is false, but 4 equals 4 is true.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's why you always just want to use the 3 equal sign and assume that they're absolutely true. Same type, same value.
And that's because true is like a special keyword.
That's because true is a special keyword. Yeah, it literally means true. So like if you evaluate, like that's what's happening here, right? When I say 4 equals 4 and I get back true, I'm getting back that same true, T-R-U-E, without quotes around it. Yep.
I don't think I understand the purpose of the console. So why would you be looking at the console?
So you look at the it's just for us to be able to do debugging. It's just so that we can have a place to write when we write our code, we can do console.log and we see some output happen.
Okay.
That's all. Like me writing in the console right here, I could have done the exact same thing here. I could have done console.log 4 plus 5 and then console.log quoted 4.5, right? But all that's going to do is run this code in this console, which is the same process. I was just speeding things up a bit by playing around inside of there. The reason why you're going to want this is when you have an issue, right? So let's say, for example, that I created a function called name, and it's going to take let's say that I mess up and I put quotes around it, and so I'm going to say name, and then I say return name, and then I say call the name function. I get unexpected string. It tells me that it's on line 1. That's fine. So let's go ahead and fix that. Let's go inside of here, and I'm going to say okay. Like console log it. All right. So I put John in as the parameter, but I'm getting back name as the value, right? And that's confusing to me. And I know this is very small and we can figure out why because we can just look at it. But when you're talking about thousands of lines of code in your project, it becomes far more complicated to understand why this is happening. So the first thing that I would probably want to do is know what is name when it gets to here. So I can console log out name. Well, shoot. Name right there is John. Why am I not getting back John? Well, it's got to be on this line because that's the only other thing that exists in our code base. And so I then probably realize I need to unquote name.
Okay. So this is similar to opening the HTML file.
So we
see what you're getting back.
Yeah, so we do, like, all of this is actually happening because in our HTML file, we have script sourced in index.js. So that file is being included in index.html, which is where I actually am. That's what I actually have open. But because I've put index.js in as a script tag, the browser is compiling, it's executing all of the code that exists inside of index.js.
Just got a question. This is talking about opening HTML file. I'm still amazed at how when you check out another branch or create another branch, it creates a clone of that whole directory, and then you switch back and it knows where you are. They get how the terminal source of the OS
Yep.
of the computer you're on.
Yep.
Like when I refreshed the browser,
Yeah.
it changed the index HTML in the master branch rather than index HTML, which is what I already had open from the other branch.
Yeah.
How does terminal talk to the browser?
It doesn't.
Through the OS or like directly to the browser?
It literally changes your files on your computer, right? And so when you check out the copy and you make your changes and then you add and commit it, and then you check back out master, it literally swaps the files. So that means in your browser's just looking at the files. It doesn't know anything about this Git stuff that's happening, but the files have changed. So when you refresh it, it knows that the files have changed.
Path.
Yeah, it's the same path. Yeah.
How does it do that so quickly? Is it because the documents are not large files and so it can literally change them like that?
It helps that they're smaller, but the brilliance of what Git does is that it looks for changes, which is where this merging comes in and stuff, and it just saves the change.
Gotcha.
So it doesn't have to look for every file that exists, it just looks for the files that have been changed between one branch and the other, and it just swaps those files and only those files out.
The whole files are just the characters that change?
I'm not 100% sure on that. Earlier on, my Git understanding was it just swaps out the characters. I don't think that's true anymore, given that I'm pretty sure no matter where you make the change in a file, it will give you conflicts if you both make the changes in the file, which makes me think that it's the whole file that it's actually looking for. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And it can do that using shells. We actually do this for some of the stuff that we do, looking for differences. We look at clients will integrate with us by putting CSVs onto a FTP site that we'll then pull down that has student information and update every day. But we SHA the whole file and we SHA every row in that file so that we can just look for differences. Now, SHA is basically, I'll give you some text and then I want you to turn it into a compressed format, which is the so that is a SHA, which is just saying, given a bunch of strings, a long string, compress it down into something that's that's just a few characters, right? And then just print out that string. And so I know every time I compress this in the same way, if it's the same content, it should always give me back the same SHA. If the SHAs are different, then I know something's wrong, but I haven't had to load up the entire file. I just check 2 strings that are very small.
Gotcha.
Yep. Cool. Okay. So yeah, so we should all be on master now. Make sure that I get back into clean state before we move forward. Oh, I went too far. Okay, whatever. Beauty of Git. If you don't like your changes, just git checkout dot, and then they're gone. But I should have clicked the other button. But they're gone. Okay, so we are now going to git checkout-b, your name / CSS-fundamentals. Yep. Yeah, and the branch naming that we're using it's just to help you find it on GitLab later. It doesn't. If you don't get it exactly right, it's no big deal. If you want to do CSS fund, that's fine. Just making suggestions. Okay, so if we have this little project, right? We have index.html, index.js, index.css. If I want to make changes to my styling, how do I do that? Where do I make styling changes? Sort of a review from last time. In the index.css file, right? So there's a couple of ways to make style changes to our HTML. The first one is called inline styles. So for example, if I come down here and I create a div and I create a style attribute and I say color red, some text, right? So we actually see some text and it's red. That's called inline styling. Second way to create styles is in our head, we actually have style. And we can write our CSS there. And it's still red. Okay, so this is styling on the page. And then the final way is to link our style sheet in, which is the conventional, this is the most commonly used way to do it. So you generally don't want to erase your styles on that page. It's called separation of concerns. So we're trying to do our styling in one place, our JavaScript in one place, and our HTML in one place, and they're all separated from one another because they all have different purposes. So let's try to go through those quickly. So what is the purpose of HTML? What would you say the purpose of HTML is relative to CSS or JavaScript?
It's the content.
It's the content, yeah. It's the formatting and the layout and the content of the page. It's the structure. What is CSS? It's the styling. And what is JavaScript?
The functional behavior.
The functional behavior, the functionality. Yep, that's great. Okay. So most of the time we split up these 3 pieces into those 3 different files so that we can separate concerns. As you get larger and larger projects, generally what you do is you actually organize these things into directories and into multiple files, and so that you can keep things organized. Generally speaking, though, to make things more performant, what you end up doing is having some worker, some process that will combine all of your little files into one large file and then compress that content down so there's no spaces, etc. Okay. So you generally in the end up with an index.html and index.css and an index.js or some equivalent, but you may have a source directory that has all kinds of files and folders and that type of thing. All right, so we are going to start with some just basic styling. So let's create a div here. And we did some of this last class. I just want to do a little review. So if we want to make, yeah, you can see some of there. So if we want to make the div's background color green, how might we do that?
CSS.
So what are the three parts of CSS?
The selector,
the property, and the value. So what's our selector at this point? Div. Yeah, because we only have one option for our selector right now. What is our property?
background color,
Background or background color, actually both work, but we can use background color. And then value? Green.
green.
Yeah, okay. All right.
You don't actually have to know the RPGs anymore.
No, so we'll talk about,
Oh my god.
so that you don't have to know that hex code or RGBA or any of that. So there are like 30, 40, I don't know, there's a bunch of colors that you can use. There's, well, no. So the RGBA, you can still use it. My point is, the naming convention, like using the word green, there's only 30 or 40 of those. So like when you want to get to, this is my brand's color, which could be one of like millions of colors, then you use RGBA or hex code. Yeah. Okay, we'll talk about those in a minute. All right, so if we do that, and then when we go back to our page, see, hello world. Okay, so that is one type of selector, the div. What are some of the other types of selectors that we talked about?
Paragraph.
So paragraph is another element selector that we could use. What are some of the other types of selectors?
Class and ID.
Class and ID. Yep, that's right. So if I wanted to use a class for this instead, what might I do here? A dot, and then what do we want to call it? Green background. By convention, CSS, when you're separating words, you do a dash. So it's just, you don't have to. It's just a convention.
Wouldn't that be calling whatever the class we put in the HTML file?
Yeah.
Oh,
So.
okay.
So we haven't put that class. So what do I need to do to make this actually work? You're right. So if I go back, there's no background. So how do I apply that class?
Does it go inside the div?
It goes, yeah, inside the opening div. It's an attribute called class, and then we set that equal green background. Boom. All right. So now, what if I want to, in addition to having a green background, I want, well, let's say this. I'm using a class here. Does it make sense for me to use a class here?
No.
Yeah, I mean, it could. It's probably okay. A lot of people do it. But what's the ideal in this situation?
ID.
An ID. And why is that?
It's only one div.
There's only one div that has this name, green background, being applied. So ID potentially makes more sense. So how do I change my CSS to reflect that?
A pound sign.
Pound sign. That's right. All right. So we still have a green background. That's great. So now, what if I want to add? What if I also want it to have a red color? The text. Yeah.
Text.
Color.
Color. Yeah. Sorry. It's yeah. So it's color. And okay, so it's color. Where do I put that?
Typically, new line within this.
So I could do it that way. I can do this,
Right there, yeah.
right? Created this weird thing though, because now our name of our ID is green background. Doesn't say anything about the red color. Maybe this doesn't make sense. So what's another way that I could do this?
Add another ID or class, add to HTML, add to CSS.
Yeah, so you can't add another ID. Unlike classes, you can't like add multiple. So our option is really to add another class that could be red text.
Or if you want to associate it
the hashtag that signifies ID, right?
Yes, that signifies ID. So it's going to look in the DOM, it's called Document Object Model. We'll get to that more as we get into JavaScript. It's going to look in your HTML for any elements that have an ID of green background, and then it'll apply this style. Similarly, this one is going to look for any elements that have a class of red text, and it'll apply this style. So, new class is red text. Right? Alright, so then let's say that I create another div and I want it to have a green background still, but I want it to have yellow text. What do I need to do?
Change the class.
So okay, yeah. So I need to change the class. What else do I need to? What else should I do?
Add another.
I mean, if you're going to do two of them, then it needs to be a class instead of an ID.
So that's the first thing. So we're going to do two of them with green background. So we need to take green background. We need to make it a class instead of an ID. How do we do that?
Change ID to class.
So you can't have the same attribute on any element named twice.
So is it a comma?
It's not a comma, but you're close. It's just a space. So we can do that, right? So you can apply as many classes as you want to any element by delimiting them with a space. And the order doesn't matter. Okay, so that takes care of part of it. Now what do I do with the red text? Because I don't want red text, I want yellow text. So what do I need to do?
So now does the text need to be an ID?
So yeah, so you want to make a different class name, I guess, so you can apply it on the style sheet.
Yeah, so let's make a yellow text class. You're right, we could make them two IDs. We don't need to, so we're just going to leave them as classes. And then we need to create another class called yellow text, and it'll be yellow. And then, oh, what did I miss?
You need to put a period.
That's right.
Yep.
You guys want to know how you debug CSS for issues like that? Yeah, you don't. There is no debugger. It's a pain. So yeah, same thing with HTML. So that's why actually, to me, I separate HTML, CSS, and JavaScript from one another. HTML, CSS to me is configuration, which is to say you are setting things up to be in a certain way. But there's no loops, there's no debugging, there's no conditionals, there's no variables, there's none of the things that are in a programming language. The 4 or 5 things that we're going to go over, none of those things exist in HTML and CSS. JavaScript has all those things. So, yeah. So it's configuration, so you just have to find the problem. Now you can get help finding the problem. So if you right-click on Hello World, for example, and then click Inspect, it will take you directly to that div. You see how it's highlighted? I have my cursor over it, and you can actually see that it highlights the div as I move back and forth between them in the code. It highlights them in the actual HTML, in the actual web page. Because I've clicked on red text green background, if you look over here, it tells you what styles are being displayed. So it says, hey, we're applying a red text class, which has the color red, and a green background class, which has the color green. I can see both of those classes inside of my div. If I click onto the yellow text, you can see, oh, for this element, we're applying the yellow text class and the green background class, and they have these two things. We can also play around in here a little bit. So we can uncheck yellow text, and it goes away. So basically we're saying, what if we didn't have yellow text anymore? What would happen? You can also delete the class right here in the HTML. You can see that it changes. And you can create new styles. So if you're trying to see what it looks like to have like when you're doing margins or paddings, for example, you don't know necessarily exactly what your margin or padding needs to be. You need to like look at it and see it visually. So if you want to play around with it a little bit, you can do, okay, well that's a little bit large, so I'm going to make it a little smaller, still too big. And then what you do is you say, okay, great, that's what I was looking for. Let me go take that margin and put it in my actual style sheet.
Is there a way to, if you make changes in the developer tools, is there a way to save it back to your environment? Without going into
No. So there's a, because it does, so this is the browser, it's like on the web, it has no idea about, in our case and in our case only, because we're opening the file locally directly into the browser, it knows how to make those changes. In other cases, it wouldn't. There are tools that exist out there, plugins for Chrome, that will find the differences. If you make a lot of changes in here, it'll find those differences and highlight them for you so that you can then copy and paste them back into your code. Okay. So that's the basics on CSS. Again, most of the time you're going to use these three selectors, and then you're just going to make a bunch of changes to it. Next thing I want to go over before we get into more complicated selectors is the colors, which we were just talking about, which is so you can declare colors in a variety of ways in CSS. The simplest way for most of us is green or yellow or cyan or magenta. They have quite a few, but it's not the entire list. The second way to do it is with hex code, it's called, which is actually also what that SHA is in. So a hexadecimal is a numbering system that goes up to 16 instead of 10. I believe the reason why that happened is because it was about like byte length on a CPU and how they were able to use it. And so it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, but then I'm out of numbers, but I need to be able to make it to 16 because that's how computers work at the time. So I said, sure, whatever. We'll just do the first 6 characters and we'll call it good. So hexadecimal is a numbering system that involves characters that keep you going all the way to 16. Okay. So hex code then is a way of defining basically distance on an RGB scale. So you can go from all the way white, which is F, 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 F. There's 6 of them, so you can make a lot of variation. Or you can go all the way black with this 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. So for example, I can come in here and I can put $, and then F, 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 F. And we get back to a white background, or I can do 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and now we have a black background. Hexadecimal also allows you to, when you are repeating the last 3, which is fairly common, when you're repeating the last 3, you can just use 3. So this is the same. And then we can go anywhere in between there, so we can choose any of these variations. So we could say 5A3, and we get this greenish color. And so you get a lot of color range as a result of this. The second way to declare colors is using an RGB scale, which is red, green, blue. You'll declare a number between 0 and 255 on each one of those, and it will find the right color. Yeah, I'll show you how this becomes a lot easier. You don't have to know a whole ton about these to be incredibly successful. So let's do RGBA. The A is transparency, so you can allow some level of transparency into the color. We'll go into that in just a second, but let's say RGBA, and we're going to do 100, 100, 100, 0. And we get nothing, but if I change that 0 to a 1, we get this grayish color. Okay. So what the transparency does, if I do 0.5, right. So and I can make it so that if I put 255 on red and then I put zeros into G and B, we're going to get as red as it gets, right? Because there's nothing else. And then the transparency is what's making it, like you can kind of see through it. So if I do that, I'll get a real dark. If I do that, then the white background of the body comes through a little bit. Okay. So if you're trying, a lot of like designers like the RGBA scale because it gives them a lot more flexibility in terms of what their components are and what they're working with. For you, if you're just creating a website and you just want to grab something real quick, there's tons of plugins. Chrome has one called Color Picker, which I have available right here. And if we go to something that has some colors on it, let's go here. I can say pick color from page, and maybe I want to get this nice blue. Oh, it's not. Come on. All right. Let me get the orange. Let me get something cool. Usually works better than this. I don't know if there's something about the. Let me try something else. Images. Yeah. There. So like I can grab this blue. You see it has the RGB for it, 67, 133, 244, the hex code for it. And I can just grab that if I click on it.
Is it able to pick up A if there's A and the RGB
I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah.
And what tool is that?
That's called Color Picker. Maybe. I don't know. And then, oops. So that copied it to my clipboard, and I can paste the hex code. Okay. So we have nice Google Blue G background. Okay.
So if I type Google Blue in there, it would not
No, yeah. All right, so those are our basic selectors. That is color changes. The next piece is going to be very useful for one of the labs that you do. I would say don't spend a ton of time on this because you can accomplish all of these other more complicated selectors with just putting classes on the right divs and that type of thing. I very rarely in my life need to do these more advanced selectors. It does happen every once in a while. Usually it's just because I'm trying to override some frameworks that I'm using and the way that they use advanced selectors. But the way websites are built nowadays is in small components. So it's like a single component and you're just changing the class from one thing to another depending on user interaction. But that's it. So these more advanced things just don't apply so much anymore. But we'll go through them anyway. So the first one is you can combine selectors together by placing them next to each other. So for example, if I wanted to only apply my green background to paragraphs, then I can put P dot with no space, green background, and make this green again so it's not as confusing. So now none of our backgrounds should be green because there's no paragraphs that have the class green background. But if I change, say, the first div to be a paragraph instead of a div, then the first one is green and not the second one. Okay.
Does it matter which order you put it in?
Nope. Yes, it has to because you need, so for the element one in particular, so I'm not sure if we tried to combine a class and an ID what would happen. We could try, but you can see why the order matters when you're doing an element because it would just be,
Right, yeah, makes sense.
that's, you can't do it.
But in the case of...
But if we did something like this, I'm not sure. I think that we probably can't do that. Might be able to do this. I'm not sure if either one of these work actually, but we can find out.
So you had a div.
Yep.
And then you had a heading and a paragraph in the div.
Yep.
would you go pdiv or divp? If you wanted to target.
Oh, so that's different. So that is a nested selector or child selector. We'll get to that in just a second. Okay. So this is about the element contains both of these things. So both has the ID and it has the class. Basically, it's a filter. It's saying I only want to apply background color green to classes that have green background and have the pound test. So the reason for this is you may have a green background class that has background color and let's say we do RGB 0 to 5 0. I'm not sure that the order of this matters, but it's not bad practice. I think it does. Okay, so let's say that in general I want my green background to be using RGB with 0 to 55 and maybe some level of transparency. But in the case that it also has an ID of test, I don't want to have any transparency. We can accomplish that this way. Okay, that's more complex though. So, yep, good.
It kind of confuses me. So the green background, that's the class, and then you get the hashtag test, that's an ID, right?
Yep.
But IDs can only be used once.
That's true.
So I'm very confused with that.
Because the class green background can be used all over the place. We're only going to apply this selector to the element that has both a class of green background and an ID of test.
Okay.
So there is only one test element here. I can go through that. So. Okay. So both of these have a green background class, right? Only one of these has an ID of test.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure this is going to work. Hey, look, it worked. Okay, so sometimes you get lucky. God's good. So we start off with both of these have a green background class. So for both of them, it's going to try to apply this green background up here, which has a transparency of 0.5.
Okay.
Only one of them has an ID of test as well. And so it applies this background instead. So then if I have more, so like if I create more of these divs, so this one doesn't have an ID of test, so it continues to have the transparent background.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So let's say I just did, I just made the selector the ID of test.
Yep.
Would it still work without doing the class and then the select and then the ID?
So that's where things start to get a little bit tricky sometimes.
So
I don't know.
In the lab, when I was putting the class in the ID, it told me that it was overvalued and I only needed to put the ID.
Yeah, we'd have to look at that explicitly. I'm not sure. But so the problem with doing something like this, right? So test has background color green. The class green background has background color with 0.5. If I go back to the HTML, I have two conflicting attributes essentially, right? So test is telling me to do one thing style-wise, green background is telling me to do another. Which one wins has something to do with order. And I'm not sure exactly what the ordering is. Generally, we want to avoid this. Don't try to apply this style twice to the same element if you can avoid it. Because I think if I do, might be this is the culprit. Oh, so it could be this, or it could just be that ID wins over class. Find out. Nope. So ID just wins over class all the time. All right. So let's get that. Now we should see. Yep, cool. All right. So the next selector. Is the compound selector, so that we can apply the same class to multiple elements. The reason for this is like you just don't want to. It's just helping you not write as much code. So this is actually kind of useful, right? So if I want to say that all of my H1, H2, and classes with green background are going to have this RGBA 15. I could write it this way, or yeah, but it's just annoying because I have to write the same thing 3 times, right? So those are equivalents. Just do H1, H2, and I can delete these guys. And then anywhere that I have an H1 or an H2, I get my green background. Let's see. All right, and then we have descendant selectors, they're called, which are going to match, and this goes back to your question before, Chen, where you can match things that are inside of, nested inside of certain things. So if I, remembering back to our semantic lecture, if I create an article and I want any paragraphs inside of my article to have a smaller font size, the way to do that is article P and then font size small, extra small, extra small. And so we get small font. So remember, this is a paragraph, and this up here is also a paragraph, so you can see the difference in the font sizes there.
So any, for example, class inside that article would then be article dot whatever.
So yeah, if you wanted to, it's really about where do you want to apply this selector, right? So for example, I have green background up here, which has background color with 0.5. If I wanted inside, if it's inside of an article, I want to do something different, then you would do dot green background.
Okay.
And then maybe I want to change the background color to red for those that are inside of the article.
And will that continue, can you apply that same logic with like multiple descendants, like if it's nested inside something else that's nested inside?
So yeah, so the way that this works is it'll go find any descendants that happen anywhere further nested inside of itself. So for example, if I put a div inside of article and then put paragraph inside of the div, so that one goes away. So if we want to get access to that, we need to do, maybe this is how it works. Nope. Yeah, so that's it. It just goes one level deep. That's all you get. So if you wanted to go deeper than that, then you would want to do
The div, right?
the div.
And then the green background without the article.
And then the green background without what?
So you would take off the article with the div, right?
Yeah, so you could do that, but then, oh, hold on. This might be working fine. I forgot I changed the property back. Font size. So that doesn't work. Oh, but it's probably changes P. This is gonna work. Do that. All right. So that, yeah, it even goes deeper down. But if I do this, I believe it doesn't. Yeah. So this one means direct descendant of.
Okay.
Okay. So it has to be. So if I bring the paragraph back out of that div.
Without it, it'll go find any P inside that article.
Yep.
Gotcha.
So see, now the paragraph that's the direct descendant is small font. The one that's not isn't.
Right.
But if I wanted both of these to have small font, then I can just do that, and both of them are small.
Gracias.
Yep. Okay. So then there's the adjacent sibling selectors, which is where like in this case, H3 and a paragraph are next to each other. So we do something like that. Was it H3 and P? Oops. So you see the adjacent paragraph. So this paragraph is adjacent to H3. That is to say they're at the same nesting level. They're right next to each other. We're going to make this blue. If I put a div in between them, then it's not blue, right? So adjacent sibling means it has to be right next to it. Another option is the sibling selector, which you can use if it's anywhere that it's at the same sibling level. But if I nest that paragraph, it'll go away. Let's see, and then, did I miss anything? Okay, and then there's the star selector, which is basically going to apply to anything where that attribute has not been set. So if I do, I'm going to make the color, I think, so basically, anywhere that the color hasn't been overridden to be a specific thing, it just makes it pink. So star selector is looking for any elements that haven't been set to have a specific thing. Again, very rarely used. So the ones that you might actually use are this descendant selector, where you're saying I want all the paragraphs inside of the article to have font size small. It's pretty rare, but you could use the sibling selector. It is common that you'll use the compound selector just so you can clean up your code. But most of the time you're just using classes, IDs, and elements to design your stuff. If you're really interested in styling and you want something that's a little bit nicer, look at SAS or SCSS. It makes it a lot faster to write code because it actually does have variables. So you can set like a primary color and then use that primary color variable all over your CSS as it gets larger. But for purposes of this class, CSS, that's all the selectors. Oh, so forgot two more. So one is the attribute selector, which is useful. So let's say, for example, I create an input type equals text, and that's it. So we're going to get a little input field that shows up for us down here. Now, if I am in my CSS, I can do something like input value equals, let's see, what's the syntax? Okay, so value starts with this might work, be very interesting. Okay, so it's pink, but if I start with, no, it doesn't do it. Alright, so let's do it a different way. So type equals text, border is going to be red, 1 pixel red solid. Okay. So where the type is text, then it's red and solid. If I create a different input that's a date time maybe, or just date, then it doesn't have a red border. Okay, so it's just attribute selection. The other syntax that you saw there was a starts with. So instead of doing it as writing the whole full name text, you could do starts with date, for example, and then we should see that both date and date time get selected. Because
Can you go back to the CSS very quickly?
Yeah. So in this case, saying the type value starts with date.
Oh.
So in this case, both of these start with date.
So around the attribute, you will always have those different brackets.
Yeah, around the attribute, you always have the square brackets.
Okay.
Yep. And then the last thing, and this is where animations come into play and you can start to do some really cool stuff. We're just going to do something quick here. Let's say green background because it's all over the place. Hover. So this is looking for a state of that element. So essentially when you hover over it with your mouse, we want to do something different when we're hovering as opposed to when it's at its normal state. So let's go ahead and say like background dash color is red. See it?
Very popular with like links, right? Like if you visited it already, you covered it.
So links do it by default.
Okay.
So links, because they're links, browsers by default do that. But what's interesting here, and I may show you guys an animation in a moment, you can do transitions pretty easily in CSS. So we can make it so that instead of it just like, boom, it's red, it could transition between the two of them over some amount of time. So you see it like fade in to things. All right. Yeah, so that's CSS selectors. Any questions? Oh, push this so you guys can play.
Lab.
Yep.
We use the input input for image.
Use, I don't know.
Let me look at it real quick. Okay, so it says, oh, never mind.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, so this is for attributes and any attribute. Yep. All right, so questions about CSS stuff? Okay. So a couple things. I opened up lesson 3 for those of you who are a little bit ahead. What I'd like to do is take the next 30 minutes, let you guys do a little bit of work so I can be here and help out with that. And then we will finish the class. I actually didn't expect this to go quite so quickly, but we'll finish the class by talking about a little bit more JavaScript because it's good to get it in early and fast and often. So
we should be doing the CSS labs?
Yeah, so finish up any CSS labs that you have from week 2. That's where you're supposed to be by next time. That's the homework. If you're ahead, you can start reading through next week's lessons and start working on those labs.
Okay, so I can show you.
Yeah. And the last CSS lab is a pain because
Which one?
the very last one with the graffiti on it.
It's like a wall with graffiti, and you're supposed to like make the okay. So when you get there, it's a little bit of work. It's good you brought it up for the whole class to share. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's open now.
Yeah, thanks, man.
I actually got there and I was like, I'm not gonna bother with this.
Yeah. So the graffiti one is incredibly difficult because it's trying to teach you about how overriding different selectors works, which is what I was talking about earlier. And you don't want to apply two classes. You don't want to apply two selectors that have the same style, right? Where you're trying to override one another because you don't really know which one's going to win. Like the graffiti lab demonstrates that because it's incredibly difficult to understand. What do I need to do to make this incredibly complex selector change from what it is currently to what I want it to be? Where that becomes useful is if you're working on a website that somebody else built a long time ago and you don't want to change all of their styles all over the place. You just want to fix this thing on this particular page and you're trying to hack a solution. You need to know how to do something like that. If you're building your own website, just name your classes well, and then you won't ever have that problem, right? You just name your classes well and apply them to where they are appropriate. And if you need to change them later, you just go change that one class and it should be simple. But I've definitely worked on websites where I had to do the graffiti exercise. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I was doing all of them, really. Let's say this one, select the image of an ID Katie Ashley.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So that's this guy, right?
yeah. I think I was thinking that you needed to, when you have an ID, you need to say,
So go back to CSS. So are you working in this file? Did you do these things?
yeah, I did these things.
Yeah. I think that's all fine.
Yeah, I finished it,
Oh.
but when I was doing it, I had on some of them like two things, like for the selector, and it was telling me that it was overvalued. But I was thinking that when you had an ID, you also needed to put the element too.
You don't. So there's probably an example that's like that, but
Okay.
all you need is the ID.
Okay. And then this one, this last one.
Yep. So that's saying find an element of image that has an attribute alt set equal to the value of kitty3. So if you go to the HTML, so see the alt attribute, so it's an image element with an attribute of alt equal to kitty3 with a lowercase k.
Okay, so when you need to do the alt attribute, then you need to have brackets.
Yeah, anytime you want to do an attribute. So we could do it like you could do source equals and then the source for the image, or type equals and then type text or whatever.
Okay.
So anytime you want to select something using attribute, you do the square brackets, you put the attribute equals and then whatever the value of the attribute is.
Okay.
Yep.
I show you something real quick.
Yep. Let me just finish real quick.
Like I said, are we
Next Monday, I will be reviewing it and the homework will be in the labs.
So just read it.
Yeah. You can start off, I would say if you're going to miss next time,
Oh,
start. Oh, okay. Yeah. Or you can start on the lab if you want to, but there's, yeah, the idea you can write all this stuff next week.
Including all this stuff too. Sheet.
Box styles. Yeah. So I think we get into box styles. I'm not sure. I think we get into box styles next time, and the flex box and grades the time.
All right.
So does it want you to change all of the elements displays to none? Is that what it's asking?
No, it wants you to change. It wants you to make all of them go away. Basically, you're trying to clean up. So if you HTTP server, yeah. So you see all these things that are in here.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to make them go away. Basically, you're cleaning up the wall.
Okay. So all of these tabs.
Yep.
Okay.
So like the first one, so you're selecting tag one. I'm just telling you the reason why it's display block. You want to change that to display none, is because it's a dot tag dash one.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to your code and make it.
So I could do wall tag and then the rest of the numbers and put all the displays to none.
Yes, but what you'll see is that that doesn't actually make all of them go away. So first of all, so wall. So just do tag one. I don't think you even need wall. Just go away if you do tag one. First one. Yeah, try that. That and the HTTP server again. I think it went away.
Oh, because I ran text.
Yeah. Press up a couple times as well. Nope. Okay. So just do it. So the URL might change. So
Oh.
Command C. So I think so. The first big tag went away.
Okay.
So then we need to get rid of all of the other ones.
And so I can just do like tag and the number. Okay.
Yeah, so you can try if you put so tag 2. So try to do the same thing for tag 2. then go back to. Didn't go away. So if you right click in there and inspect. So if you click on tag 2, you can see it's still displaying the lock. And the reason is tag 2 isn't even actually a class. It has an ID of tag 2.
Okay.
So you need to play the
This needs to be column.
Yep. So
Okay.
So now tag 2, it's still displayed lock though. And the reason is that the way this is being set is by doing wall and then finding it in your settings. So if you copy that whole thing, wall tag 2, yep. Yeah.
So you have to make sure it's written out or it's written down.
Yes, that'll get you through a lot of it if you just do it the way that it's written there. Yep. So tag 2 still display. Click on the display lock, please. It's just that. Yeah. Click on the check mark. Close. Can't see. That's probably behind things. So the reason is.
Well, it says that my cleanup says 9.
Yeah, but then you see how it gets struck out like that?
Yeah.
It's saying something else is overriding it. Which I think you just have to be more specific than it is. So if you do div in front of tag 2 in your code, fix it. Just think. Let me go look. What happened?
Alright, so display with none, still getting knocked out. But if I have a more specific selector like body, there we go. Display none goes away.
Okay, so, okay, fine.
Which actually I think, if I remember correctly, if you put body in front of most of these, it's a more specific selector. And so you end up winning. It gets you through most of the issues moving forward. Like in this next case, you see tag 4 is inside a parent. Like it's nested inside of this thing that has a class of parent. So you just have to be more specific. Or here, tag 3, it is getting its display set because it has div wall tag 3 slick. But you can be more specific by adding the wicked class. So if we take this example, we add the wicked class, and we're more specific in terms of our selector. And so we can get that one to display none. Next one, it has it because it has wall 4 and tag 4, but we can be more specific by adding that it also has to be the child of a parent. Now it goes away. And then that's where it starts to get difficult. There we go. Yeah, but for most of them, it's about being more specific in terms of the selector. So it's adding additional selectors there to help you be more specific, and then your CSS will override the CSS that they have.
I'm having trouble showing what I'm supposed to be doing.
So like if you click on tag 2, it's just right there. Now it's in wall tag 2. That one you already have doing display on. So if you click on
tag, let's just go to tag 3 because they get all the coverage. So tag 3 is display block because div wall space tag 3 slick. So we copy that piece. You can do it at the bottom. Sure. Yep.
So I didn't.
It looks like so you did get it. So, but you have to be more specific than that, or that one. Oh, maybe you did get it. Go back. No, it still says display block, but select liquid. Okay. We almost got it. So let's go back to IE. It's because they have div, and then so you put div right before the first pound sign. No space. That's where copying and pasting is important because then you don't miss those little things. So now that one's going. Go back to yours. You have to touch. There's no space between tag 3 and select. Yeah. In general, in programming, copy and paste everything. Become a phenomenal copy paster. So Command C, Command V, all over the place. Because that is, I mean, I told you guys I spend most of my day copying and pasting, and that's generally like other people's code, but you also copy and paste your own code all over the place. And the reason is, it keeps you from making small syntax errors, like putting a space where there's not supposed to be one, or forgetting a semicolon or a comma. And it also helps if you like accidentally misspelled something. It keeps you from misspelling something, right? So if you named a function name and then you call it NME because you messed up, or NSME because you messed up, you could have avoided that if you just copy and paste it. Copy and paste is different. There's some tricks to that, and Sublime and Atom. One of the things is whenever you want to copy something, try double clicking on it because it will probably grab the piece that you want. But generally, that what it does is it grabs a full word up into some point. So a lot of times we're just copying and pasting like that. Triple click gets you the whole line. We did this last time, but Command Shift D will duplicate the line for you. But if we're doing like function, this is my func, and you want to call it later, see, I just double click, and I got the whole thing. I can copy and paste it. So little tools of the trade. Yeah, it's very difficult. But if you put body and then space before the selector, that'll do 5. For 6, 7. Those are the hardest ones. I don't actually have the answer off the top of my head. That's how difficult they are to figure out. I'm gonna let you try to do it. We'll do it next time if you can't get it.
And so right now I'm getting the errors that it's overqualified. So is that something you usually see when you're trying to override?
Yeah, that's possible. They're just warnings, they're not theirs.
If I just add body, it would.
Yeah, okay, nice. Don't think that it does work for 7 because I remember getting frustrated by it. So we'll come back together and do some JavaScript in just a minute. I did want to show you guys. I talked a little bit about continuous integration and how GitLab makes that so awesome. So I'm going to show you a thing really quickly. In our repository, so in learning-git2, there's CI/CD. This is continuous integration, continuous deployment pipelines. They run anytime you push a branch. So anytime you push a branch, we're going to do this little set of code here. You don't need to understand what that is right now, but basically it's this little set of code that copies the stuff that's on your branch to what's called an S3 bucket in AWS. S3 buckets are just easy, cheap places to store things in the cloud. But you can also turn an S3 bucket into a website. So it'll serve static assets like we use in this class, so JavaScript, CSS, HTML. So what I've done is anytime you push to a branch, it will actually go up and put it into an S3 bucket into a particular directory. And then you can go to frontend.flatiron-dc.com / the name of your branch, and it exists on the internet for all the world to see. Okay. So it's just a nice little like keeping track of things. So I'll put that in Slack as well.
And if you delete that branch, which I know we haven't been doing, that at some point syncs with...
No, because I haven't done anything about that. So it will still be there forever.
Right.
Yep, yep. So don't put your social security number on the but that's,
Okay.
that's so it's basically whenever you push a branch, so for example, if I go look at the old branches that we have won't work, only the ones like from today forward, because they didn't have that GitLab CI. But like there's this Josh Functions branch. If you go to frontend.flatiron-dc.com / Josh Functions,
It's in the J.
yeah, Josh Functions. It's the functions lab, but it's right there.
Okay.
You are a baller. Okay, I see. I get it. Cool.
So for 7, if you put HTML in,
Oh, if you put HTML higher up.
it was the only thing left.
Yeah, it gets more specific.
So if there are 2 branches with that particular name, would you have to, that could be anywhere within what Flatiron is set up as a AWS bucket?
So it's my site actually. I just bought the domain flatiron-dc because it was easy for everyone to know. Yeah. But if you can't have more than one branch with the same name, you would just be working on the same branch. But you could create the branch, merge the branch, delete the branch, recreate the branch locally and push that. It would just override what used to be there.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Literally all it's doing in that CI/CD pipeline is that it literally just copies whatever is on your branch to a file location and removes whatever was there. Yeah.
And is that, would people set that up because that's where you have a history of all the versions you can go back to if you need to.
So you don't usually do this for that purpose because technically you have a history of all the versions in GitLab, but you do this so that you don't have to. So how this would work prior to this GitLab CI/CD stuff and AWS S3, like I can tell you. So for example, this website is our actual real website that exists in production and people use every single day. It is deployed in exactly this way. So we run some tests and stuff in addition, but in the end, when it finishes its pipeline, it pushes up the static assets to S3, and then we point this URL to that S3 bucket. And so now it's visible. So when I want to push something to production, all I have to do is click a button in GitLab and say push this to production, and it goes and pushes these things up to the pipeline. Prior to that, you would put these assets onto a server somewhere, and that server would have to have some code to know how to deploy it out into the web. So that when you hit the URL, you actually hit a server, and then the server goes and gets those assets and sends those assets back down. And the way that you would deploy that is typically that you would have to manually SCP, it's called, SSH copy. You'd secure copy the thing from your local computer up to there, which means that because it's on my local computer, one thing is it might be out of date relative to what's actually on master, and so I'm a little bit behind. But it's also the case that something could potentially go wrong along the way and I don't know about it. It also means that there's no history of who's doing it and it's not automated. So we currently have a manual process where we click a button before final approval to get to production, but where we're going is it passed all the tests, great, put it on production. Like that's it, right? You just say, look, we did the pull request, we merged it into master, it passed all the tests, put it in production. And so you don't have to have anybody who's there whose job it is to pull it down, get the latest, and then push it back up to a server. And you don't have to have the server set up, sitting there waiting. It just is happening. So as you're pushing code, it's just going out into production. Just speeds things up. Yeah. Super simple to set up. I mean, if you're interested, like I could walk you through the steps. It takes like 10 minutes to set one of these things up, and then you're good to go, which is incredible because it used to be like a few years ago when we would do this, it could take a day to get a thing set up and ready to, yeah.
And is there any performance benefit from that process you described? Like, does caching remain if you are using that second method, but not the first, but not the old method?
So caching is like independent. So you can do caching through S3, or we use a thing that sits on top of all of our S3 buckets called CloudFront. And it provides caching, so it keeps things cached for an hour on the server before things will change, which improves performance a little bit.
Also, caching implies that the server level, not
both.
Right.
Yeah. So you oftentimes, when you're going to a website, you're still seeing the old version of the website unless you go into an incognito window or you disable the caching or whatever. The way ours is set up is we cache on the server side, and we tell you once our cache is removed, like an hour has passed after changes have been made and somebody hits the site, we will then tell your browser, hey, you need to update your cache too. I have new stuff for you. And then and only then will it go ask for what the new stuff is. Yeah, so it happens on both sides actually.
Yeah.
But with these things, JavaScript assets, there's not, I mean, even if you don't do the caching, even if you don't do the compression, even if you have a massive website, it's still super fast. Like that is the least of your worries when it comes to performance.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. Okay.
That would be awesome to do the 10-minute, put it together at some time. We have it during 10 minutes.
Yeah, we can try to do that. Yeah, we'll maybe walk through, if we have time like we do tonight in another class, we may walk through setting up an AWS account, which you can use for free in many cases, there's a free tier, and then how to set up just a basic bucket like this so you can get yours. Yep. Okay, so depending on where you are, let's make sure that we can get back to master and we're back in a clean state. So again, get add dot, get commit -m, some message, get push origin, your branch name, and get checkout master.
Get status, and we should be back in the on branch master. Your branch is up to date with origin master. Nothing to commit. Working true clean. So we're going to do these commands like, I don't know, a few hundred more times before we get out of this class. So if it's still like not obvious to you what's happening, that's okay. We'll keep reviewing at the beginning of every class what each of these pieces means. Hopefully some of that will start to sink in. But do make sure that you have somewhere like a file saved on your computer. You can open up a new Atom file and save it there, whatever the case may be. But make sure that you have these commands just saved. So git add dot, git commit -m, so message, git push origin, and then your branch name, and then git full origin master. And then git checkout -p branch name. Okay. You should have all these saved on your computer somewhere so that if you forget what you're supposed to do, you don't have to watch what I write up here every time and try to remember. You can just copy from that file. So most of the time we'll run these three things when we're done with the branch. We'll then run this on master, and we'll check out our branch for the new thing. Keep going. All right. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you're just in a bad spot.
We're doing another branch right now.
Yeah, so then we're going to, once you get into the clean state on master, we're going to git checkout -p, your name, and then we're going to do conditionals. Start talking a little bit about if and else. So when this nice clean state again, we have our project set up. We have our index.cs, index.html, index.js. Go into index.js so we can start to play around with conditionals a little bit. We'll start by just using without functions, and then we'll try one with functions, with a function, and then we'll go from there. So let's say that I create a variable called car, and let's go ahead and start playing around with objects a little bit more. So we're going to create an object for the car. We're going to say that it is a make and model. So make of Ford.
Question.
Yep.
When I open my JS file, should it have been blank or should it still say what it said before?
It should still say what
Okay.
it should say console.log. I should not say that. So git status.
I did. It says
Okay, so I think your stuff got on the master. So do git branch space dash capital D space master. So we deleted master from your computer locally. So now if you do git space fetch, that'll pull down all the branches including master. And then if you do git checkout master, so now that's what it's supposed to look like. So now you can check out your branch, but you'll have to name it something else. So just git checkout dash B. You just name it conditionals. Yep. Yep. All right, so we're just going to have our car. It's going to have a make and a model and a year. Okay. And then we're going to write an if-else statement. So if the car dot make equals Honda, then console.log I am a Honda. Else
console.log I am not a Honda. Okay, so what's going to happen? Who can explain to me what's going on here, first of all? So what is this first line doing?
You're naming a variable car,
Mm-hmm.
and then the attributes of that variable are make, model, and year.
Yep. Yeah, so it's an object, and
Object.
the object has the attributes of make, model, and year. Yep. And then what is this line of code doing here?
So that's the conditional saying if the attribute make of that car object is a Honda,
Yep.
then write I am a Honda on the page.
Yep. Well, in the console, but yeah.
Console, yeah.
And what is this line doing?
If not, say I'm not a Honda.
Yep. So everybody see that? Does that make sense? Okay. So I go to my index.html. It says I am not a Honda. So let's go ahead and do something a little bit more complicated. So we'll say we're going to have a couple cars. So a Ford, and we'll have a Honda. Let's see. And it'll be a 2001. Yeah, we'll actually make this. So this is my car when I graduated from college, and this is my car when I graduated from grad school, which was quite the upgrade. I had a lot of fun with that car. I got in a lot of trouble with that car. I no longer have that car, but no, it was a good time. Yeah, with the Odyssey, obviously. Yeah, the Odyssey was a lot of fun for different reasons. But that was, yeah, the Odyssey was, you know, we go on ski trips, and I actually lived out of the back of it for a summer because I didn't want to live at home. But the Mustang was, yeah, I mean, it was so much fun. It was so fast. Anyway, so we have two cars. We have a Honda. We have a Ford. What happens now if I run this?
It doesn't know which object you're looking for. Does it got cars on it?
Yeah, so it does know the object that I'm looking for is car. So you're like, you probably get it, but the issue is that car doesn't exist. So we're going to get a car not defined error. So we can look at what it looks like when we start to have issues. So it says uncaught reference error car is not defined. And it tells us exactly where on index.js line 5. And in fact, if you click on it, it'll take you right there and show you where the problem is. You get it? Okay. You just look like you were thinking. Okay, so what should I replace this with potentially? Either Ford or Honda. So if I wanted to say I am not a Honda, what do I put here?
Ford.
Not a Honda. What if I wanted to say I am a Honda? Honda. Right, so pretty straightforward. Just to continue with the examples with the variables quickly, I can set a variable car to be Ford or Honda, and then I can leave my car.make there. And then all I have to do is switch what car is equal to. See that? So that's a nice way then to think about functions and how functions and parameters work. Right? So I can have a parameter called car for a function that I can then swap in either Ford or Honda. Does that make sense? So how would I create a function that has car as a parameter? How would I change this code so I have a function that takes car as a parameter and either prints out I am a Honda or I am not a Honda? So I want to create code. I want to create a function that takes car as a parameter that will do
this code. So it'll print out either I am a Honda or I am not a Honda.
Can you put car equals Honda, comma?
So that has to do with how parameters get called inside of a function. But the first thing we need is a function, right? So how do I write the function? Function, sure. And then what comes next?
Brackets.
What's that?
Name of the function.
Name of the function. What do you want to call what?
Comment.
Make, sure. And then what comes after that?
Brackets.
Yeah, parentheses. Yep. Because what goes inside the parentheses? The arguments are the parameters. In our case, it's going to be car, just because. And then what do I do after that?
Curly braces.
Curly braces. Okay, so now what needs to go inside of this function?
The logic that you've got below.
That's right. So take the if else, put it inside of here. Screws up all that formatting. That's great. Okay. So now, what do I need to do to make it print out I am a Honda? To make our code print out I am a Honda.
You have to
Call that function.
Call that
call
function.
it to,
So I do car make and then what? To say I am a Honda.
Run the parentheses
Right.
and the parameter of Honda.
Honda. Says I am a Honda. So now what if I wanted to say I am not a Honda?
Same but called with forward.
So same but called with Ford. What if I do that?
Error.
No, it won't be. So I'm still passing an object. There might be an error because it's probably going to say that there's no make. Let me see. Nope. So this is being passed in as a car. It's still an object. Car is just an object. We're just passing in an empty object. This empty object doesn't have a make, and so as a result, it goes into the else because car.make is going to equal undefined, which is a keyword in JavaScript, and undefined is not Honda, and so it goes into the else block.
Right.
So what if I do that?
Still print Honda.
So prints I am not a Honda. So car.make is still undefined. True.make is undefined. So yeah.
Right.
Okay. So that's functions, variables, objects, conditionals. One more piece of conditionals that we'll do. In addition to doing the if and else, which you could technically do tons of. So right, I could go into my else, and inside of here I could have another conditional. If car.make equals Ford, then I'm going to console log I am a beast, a busy, and then otherwise I'm going to console log I'm not a Honda. Okay, so you could keep nesting these in the else's over and over and over again. An alternative to that is you can use what's called else if, which just makes it so you don't have to keep going so deep. So I can say else if car.make is Ford, and then else. And so these will go in order.
So it'll check if the car is a Honda, otherwise it'll check if the car is a Ford, otherwise it'll check, otherwise it'll do the Honda piece. So it goes if, else, else. That order is particularly important because if I say, let's make them both the same year for a moment. So if I say car.year is 2013, this applies to the Honda both times, right? But it will never make it to this block for the Honda. And the reason is that it will only execute this first one because it already hit a conditional that works. Okay. If you wanted to do both of those things, then you need to not.
So we can continue in the first if block.
In the first if block here, you can't. There's no way of telling it to continue like that. Continue is for like looping through things, but it doesn't tell you keep evaluating more things in the same conditional siblinghood. But you could do it this way if you want to.
So what are you saying if you put that one?
So if you put this as an else if, then it's saying else if. So if you haven't already been satisfied by the if statement, but you are satisfied by this else if statement, then come in here. So in the case of the Honda, like if we just do the Honda, it says I am a Honda. It doesn't say I'm a beast. The reason is that even though car.year for Honda is 2013, we've already satisfied the condition before. So if we switch these two positions, then it says I'm a beast, but it doesn't say. But if I want both of them to happen, I could, instead of doing an else if, just do another if later in my function. It says both. And you see how white space doesn't matter. I'm putting this is horrible coding, but like, this is not pretty. But you can have as much white space as you want. So we'll say I did that on purpose because I was trying to make a point. Okay. Since we still have a couple minutes, I'll do an array quickly just so you can see where this power comes in. So we're going to create an array of cars, and because we've already defined them up here, we can just do Ford, Honda. Then what we're going to do is loop over and say for car of cars. Car make cars. It might be for in, but oh, that's it. Let's so you can see what's happening is we are looping over our cars, Ford and Honda, in that order. And we then print the car model, and then depending on the conditional, we'll either say, I am a beast, or I am a Honda. In the case of Honda, it actually says both of those, because both of the conditionals apply. We can add to this array if we wanted to. We could put in one of those other options. So you see here, the make or the model is undefined, and it's not a Honda. Okay.
So with an array, it will print all of it.
with an array. So when you create the array and then you loop over the array, what this is saying is do all of the code that's inside of these curly braces for each iteration, and each iteration is going to be the car. So it calls, really what it's doing is it's calling car make Ford, car make Honda, car make undefined. So really, like, this could be rewritten and we get the exact same response.
The unintuitive thing with that, the way that for loop is written is that for car of cars, like car is not a keyword. Car could be anything, right?
Car can be anything.
Or
Yep.
a table of cars.
Yep, it could be.
And car make table, and it would still go through that array.
Yep, so H is really just the item in the array. So it says for each of the items in the array. You have cars matters because cars is referencing this array.
Yeah.
But for item in array. I'm going to. Cool. That's it. You did it. Now you're actually programmers. Like, that is literally all the things that you need to be able to develop. You have even some debugging with console.log. You can, with this one exercise, you have all of the tools that you need to be able to do anything. It's just a matter of time and money now. So, yeah. All right, cool, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, so for next time, you want to make it through, I think it's the box. Let's see. So week 3. So make it through all the labs that you haven't completed so far in week 2. And then you want to make it through box styles, at least doing the README in week 3. If you have time to go through the labs and try and get ahead, I would definitely recommend that you do that. But we may, next time we're going to talk a little bit about Flex and what that does and how to reposition things. We may go through that pretty quickly next time, largely because the only time that you're ever going to use that in the future is if you are trying to, again, hack somebody else's website to make it work because they used old technology. Flex has been around now for 4 years, 5 years, and that's what everybody uses instead. So we're going to spend a lot more time on that than we will on the Flex stuff because it's just old, and you should definitely not start a website by using it. So, cool?
Cool.
All right.
All right.
See you guys.
What was the name of this branch?
Say that again?
The name of this branch. I was just going to do the git push.
I don't know, but if you type git branch or git status, it'll show you. Also, be on the lookout. I think tomorrow they're supposed to send a survey about how the course is going so far. So make sure you fill that out. If you don't fill it out, we'll take a little bit of time at the beginning of next class to finish it. But
Yep. Y'all have a good night. Good.
Say, where else is this?
what is this?
The flat iron cup.
Oh, I don't know. What? Like you used it to get some water or something?
Was it the metal cup?
Yeah.
It goes to the pantry, but that's okay. Just leave it. Somebody will get it. Oh, I don't mean to leave it here. Leave it
I'll put it
somewhere
in the
in the
kitchen.
hallway or in the pantry.